Answer continues next on AM 560 The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560 The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Who investigates the investigators? Who prosecutes the prosecutors? A question we come to often these days. Representative Elise Stefanik from New York hopes it's the Department of Justice's Office of Professional Responsibility. She has penned a letter to said office filing that contains an ethics complaint against Jack Smith, the prosecutor in the Trump J6 and classified docs case. It's obvious to any reasonable observer that Jack Smith is trying to interfere with the 2024 election and stop the American people from electing Donald Trump, she writes. At every turn, he has sought to accelerate his illegal prosecution of President Trump for the clear, if unstated, purpose of trying him before the November election. The Justice Department's own policies clearly prohibit Smith from doing so, and as a DOJ employee, he is bound by those policies. Moreover, when the district court imposed a stay on the proceedings, Smith and his office ignored it and continued to file discovery documents. Smith's conduct has brought disrepute to the Department of Justice and the entire federal government, and the DOJ's Office of Professional Responsibility should impose the discipline that such conduct warrants. And her letter is detailed with the proper citations to support the accusations that she is making and requesting the Office of Professional Responsibility to investigate. What's the likelihood that Jack Smith gets slowed down by the Department of Justice as compared to the likelihood that he gets slowed down by Judge Eileen Cannon, who seems to be the only officer of the court in these Trump proceedings that is expressing any proper skepticism in the direction of the federal government or any other government? Same could be said of the lack of skepticism in Fulton County and Manhattan. For more on all of this, pleased to be joined by Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney, Southern District of New York, and contributing editor at National Review, as well as author of Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency. Andy, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning.
What about Stefanik's request for a look-see into Jack Smith's conduct by the Department of Justice, and not just whether or not that will actually go anywhere, because I suspect it won't, but the substance of the argument that she's making, that he is in violation of DOJ policies, and again, it's just another illustration of sort of the ends justify the means protocol when it comes to Trump.
Well, I agree with you. I don't think her complaint is going to go anyplace, but I don't think that's the point of it. I think she's trying to make a public case, which is really the only one that you can make at this point. The Democrats are running the Justice Department. They're running this prosecution, so they're obviously not going to do anything internally about it. There may be some relief in the courts. For all the complaining, nothing has happened in the Washington case since, late February, because it's been tied up in appeals. So that in and of itself is a kind of putting the brakes on it. But it is true that there's explicit Justice Department guidance, which is a rule on prosecutors from the DOJ manual, that says that you can never take the political calendar into account when making prosecutorial decisions. And Smith has been unabashed about the fact that he's making his haste to get to trial is over the idea that Trump has to be tried prior to Election Day, which is completely inappropriate. There's no rule of law reason why that has to happen. There simply is no reason. And I think what gives up the game is down in Florida. In one of the arguments down there, Smith's prosecutors said that the so-called 60-day rule, they don't think it applies to Trump. And when asked by Judge Cannon why it didn't, the 60-day rule is this unwritten rule where they're not supposed to take action within 60 days of an election to avoid influencing it one way or the other. And when Cannon asked why no 60-day rule for Trump, what Smith's lawyer said is he's already been indicted, so everybody already knows what the underlying facts of the case are, so it can't really affect the election. So if that's true, then why do we have to have a trial prior to election?
Exactly.
He's right about that, by the way, So they're talking out of both sides of their mouths, but that's what they do.
And so the Eileen Cannon, though, in terms of the disclosures that she made or the documents she ordered unsealed last week, there were some interesting information there that just provides more context, and sort of for like anybody paying attention, this is not going to be particularly shocking, but it's still important to understand and document. It's like what you suppose is true and then what is confirmed to be true. Those are not the same things. One, that you had White House involvement in this from very early on. I'm talking about the classified documents.
Right.
You got more substantiation that the DOJ did in fact threaten the judicial nomination of a co-defendant, Walt Nauta, in the case.
And the lawyer who did that is still and the prosecutor who did that is still running the case down in Florida.
Okay, right. And then also the issue of Trump's security clearance allegedly being retroactively revoked, and how that would impact his, the propriety of him having classified documents or declaring something classified or not. I mean, it just seems that we just have more evidence that, this whole thing has been, again, cooked up, ends justify the means. We got to figure out a way to get this guy by hook or by crook.
Well, I've always thought, I wrote about this a couple of times, Biden, this whole idea of bringing Jack Smith in was to create the illusion of independence and the idea that the White House and the Biden Justice Department didn't have anything to do with the investigation and prosecution of Trump. And I've argued a number of times that's always been ridiculous. Mm-hmm. There's no prosecutor in the federal government who actually has his own power. Everybody is a delegate who exercises the president's power at the president's pleasure. The only power in the executive branch belongs to the president. The special counsel works for the president's Justice Department and reports to the president's attorney general. But more to the point, under the Presidential Records Act, once a president tries to declare confidentiality in connection with documents that arise out of his administration, by statute, they have to go to the incumbent president and ask him to take a position on whether they're going to follow executive privilege or not. That's baked in the cake. There's nothing Biden can do about that. So he's tried to slough that off on the Federal Records Administration and try to pretend that underlings are actually making these decisions. But he's in the middle of it. It's unavoidable. The prosecution is under his power. And we know from the reporting that we got about a month ago from Politico that he's been pretty aggravated at Attorney General Garland because Trump hasn't been brought to trial yet. He thinks that it should have happened a long time ago. So, his campaign is the Trump trials. He's not going to win a second term on promises like let's give tuition relief to the whack job woman at Columbia who came out and gave that speech yesterday. And by the way, let's bring all the Palestinians in as refugees. I don't think that's going to be a very effective reelection program. So he's banking on the Trump prosecutions for purposes of reelection, and so far it's backfired on them. Because I think the public looks at this and they say this is not the way we're comfortable with having the criminal justice system used, even if you're not a Trump fan. But what we don't know, Dan, is how are people going to react once Trump, if it happens, gets convicted of a felony?
Right.
And we just don't know what's going to happen until that happens.
We've got some indication from polling, but it's not. It doesn't tell you enough, because it doesn't tell you, who would rethink their support of Trump and and what the net is. There's some segment of the electorate that's at least saying that they would reconsider whether or not to support Trump if he was a convicted felon. But it's very hard to discern that and then spread that over the swing states at this point. I completely agree that's an unknown at this point.
Well, maybe if Trump gets convicted in New York, we can find out what the crime is, because in the indictment doesn't say what the crime is. Is that how we're going to find this out?
Well, Amy, that's a really good point, because to the discussion we're having now, I think it may not only matter whether Trump gets convicted. I think it matters what he gets convicted of. So I think most people who've now watched what's gone on in New York for 2 years realize that New York is rigged against Trump. I mean, what they're doing, I wrote a column about this yesterday. It's not only in violation of the federal Constitution, which requires an indictment to say what the trial is. New York's Constitution requires a law to tell people what it is that's prescribed. And the law that New York invoked here, I think, violates the New York Constitution. So this thing is a farce. It happens on the heels of the civil fraud trial, which was also a farce. And I think a lot of people are going to think New York is just, with its elected Democratic prosecutors who promise to use the power of their office to go after Trump, I think most people are going to just think New York is rigged against Trump. And I don't think it'll count as much against him if he gets convicted in this case. And I agree with you. If he gets convicted, maybe we'll find out what he's convicted of.
Well, as compared to the Fed cases, no, I hear what you're saying, but
at least, yeah, the J6 case, it would be bad for him if he got convicted. And I think if he got convicted of obstruction, I don't see the Florida case going prior to Election Day, but I think if he got convicted of obstruction down there, it would hurt him.
Do you see the classified docs case going at all? Is there a possibility still that Eileen Cannon grants a motion to dismiss?
I don't see the case. I don't see a motion to dismiss prior to Election Day, and I don't see the case going. But I think that Smith has himself to blame for that. If he had tightly indicted an obstruction case and left the classified documents to the side instead of 36 classified documents counts, classified documents cases are very hard to get to trial because of all the statutory procedure that you have to go through pretrial in order to determine what's admissible at trial, and there are appeals, and even when you're trying hard to get the case to trial, those cases are very hard to get to trial. But I think Smith had two chances: one at the beginning when he was deciding what to charge, and then when Biden, when the special counsel said that Biden, they have all the evidence they need to charge him, but they decided not to charge him. So, Biden's got the same federal classified documents charges as Trump or conduct, and they're not going to charge Biden. At that point, the smart thing to do would have been drop the classified documents charges against Trump, because if you're telling everyone Trump and Biden should be treated differently because Trump obstructed the investigation and Biden didn't, then the thing to do is drop the classified charges against both of them and just do Trump on the obstruction. And if they had done that, I think he could have gotten the case to trial a lot faster, but I don't see it happening now.
They couldn't do it because it runs counter to their political messaging on the topic, and that political messaging is critical to creating this, to sustaining this story that he is a threat to our democracy, and his recklessness with classified information to endanger our national security, and all the stuff that you hear from the hyperventilating folks on MSNBC and CNN and elsewhere. That it's all everything about this is political in terms of both timing as well as messaging, and so. Right, to some extent, you're right. They have to take the more difficult path because of how they've backed themselves into a corner rhetorically in terms of the political messaging. So with the Supreme Court's decisions pending on both presidential immunity and the provision of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that's been used, the interruption of official proceeding against Trump and hundreds of other J6 defendants, I mean, is there any chance that the J6 trial starts before Election Day?
There is, but I think it's going to depend on Smith again. I have a feeling, after listening to the argument and following the issue carefully, that what the court is likely to do is send the case back to Judge Chutkan with instructions to sort out what's an official act versus what's a private act that doesn't have any conceivable immunity claim. And that would require a lot of proceedings. But at the same time, at the oral argument, Trump's lawyers conceded that there are major parts of that indictment that are just private activity, right, and don't and are not covered by, could not be covered by immunity. If Smith told Judge Chutkan, you know what, we're not going to go forward on anything other than the stuff that's clearly personal and clearly private, not immunized, and we'll just leave the rest of the case on the cutting room floor, and we'll just go forward on this part of the case, which would mainly be the so-called fake electors scheme, and then they have Trump also signing a verification in one of the election challenge cases, I think in Georgia, where they say there was false information. He could go to trial on just that stuff, and he could probably get the case to trial. But I think, Dan, this is the same point that you just raised, which is they want the whole case. You know, they want the riot. They want, you know, they want everything. They want the vice president communications. They want the communications with the state officials. All the stuff that Trump can argue is official activity that he has immunity from. So, again, I think if Smith had faith in his case and were willing to say, no, we'll cut it down to the bone, but we want to go to trial, he could go to trial. And he'd have a chance, especially in Washington, of convicting him. But I just don't see him doing it.
So we have the Supreme Court effectively as the backstop that's still really in effect as a check on what's happening at the district and appellate court level. Is there any check in the New York state court system? Because it seems like what you were describing, have been describing, and others with respect to Alvin Bragg and the trial court, with respect to gag orders, with respect to, you were just saying, the violations of New York, of not just the United States Constitution, but New York State's own Constitution, and the appeals on these matters, the efforts to get something resembling a fair trial have all been thwarted, and there just doesn't seem to be any backstop to this Torquemada routine that Alvin Bragg and Judge Merchant are doing at the trial court level.
Well, let me put it this way. I think there is a backstop, but it may not be a sufficient backstop. When I say there is a backstop, would you ever in your life have believed up until last week that Harvey Weinstein's conviction would be reversed by the New York appellate court? I sure didn't think it would be. And yet they did, because it wasn't a fair trial, and they were completely right about that in that opinion.
Right.
So, yes, they got the backstop, but it took 3 years. And how does it help Trump if he get, you know, I think all these, if he gets convicted in the New York case, I think it'll be thrown out on appeal. But that may not happen until 2026.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I want to read you a paragraph from this interview that Trump did for Time Magazine. And, you know, this is how far will he go that people are talking about. And it's all about, of course, the insinuation that how much of a dictator will Trump be? We know he's going to be a tyrant, but how much of a tyrant? But this line, the interviewer asks him about, what's going to be different in a second term. And he basically, the top line conclusion, he's not going to be quite as nice, as charitable, particularly to his enemies, as he describes himself being in his first term. On the matter of Biden, this is the paragraph. Trump has vowed to appoint a real special prosecutor, quote unquote, to go after Biden. I wouldn't want to hurt Biden, he says. I have too much respect for the office, but he suggests Biden's fate might be tied to an upcoming Supreme Court ruling on whether presidents can face criminal prosecution. If they say that a president doesn't get immunity, says Trump, then Biden, I am sure, will be prosecuted for all his crimes. So, and then, they go into Trump directing the Department of Justice or a special prosecutor to go after someone and so on and so forth. As the irony, of course, of what's actually happened to Trump is completely lost, ignored by these same people, I understand. But in terms of Trump's posture in a second term, number one, is there a special prosecutor that's needed? Why not just charge the Department of Justice to enforce the law, including against a former president, depending on what more comes from this investigation, if there is more to come. And sort of your reaction to his thought process with respect to Biden after he took a pass on Hillary Clinton in 2016 when he won.
Well, look, he took a pass on Hillary Clinton not knowing what they had in store for him, right? So he's like, once burned, twice shy. Right. But the other thing is I can't help just being hysterical about this in a funny way, because I spent hours last week listening to the Supreme Court argument where Mike Dreeben, who was the lawyer for the special counsel, got up in front of the Supreme Court and said, look, you don't have to worry about politicized prosecutions because we have a structure here. Mm-hmm. Prosecutors take an oath. They never act politically. They have to go to the grand jury and show them probable cause. Otherwise, there can't be any indictments. And you don't have to worry about the Attorney General because he gets evaluated by the Senate before he can be confirmed. So all this stuff about politicized prosecutions, you don't need to worry about any of that.
Right.
And then you have Trump, who's like slightly ahead in the polls right now, who is promising that when he gets elected, he's the candidate of retribution. So at the very moment they're in front of the Supreme Court, they're saying there's no politicized prosecutions. Trump can't be there because he's up in New York where Alvin Bragg, the elected Democrat, has him on trial in a charge where we don't even know what the crime is at this point. And Dreeben's looking at Justice Alito and saying, no, don't worry, nothing political here to worry about. I mean, please.
Andy McCarthy, former chief.
Whipped up about it.
Yeah, former chief assistant U.S. attorney, Southern District of Manhattan, contributing International Review, author of Ball of Collusion. Andy, thank you as always for your insights. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Have a great week.
Thanks, you too. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line. Coming up on Chicago's Morning Answer,
we'll talk Bidenomics and anti-Bidenomics as practiced in Argentina by Javier Milei with Steve Moore at 7:37.
But now let's head into the newsroom. Here's Mike Scott.
66 degrees coming up on 7:30.